Okay, so welcome everybody to Saratoga Whiskey Club tasting number 108. We're climbing right up there very quickly. We actually just caught up to one of the members in the room tonight, Dan Phillips. His club is having tasting number 108. I believe it's like this weekend maybe, or Saturday. So we just passed him. We're at least tied for the moment. The last 2 years we sprinted, to say the least. So this is tasting number 108. We're going to have a really great tasting tonight. This is considered one of our luxury tastings. These are some pretty special bottles that we're having tonight. These are always really a lot of fun. And new to pretty much everybody, including myself, which makes these tastings even more fun. So we're going to focus tonight on Edrington, and some of you might know Edrington, and a lot of you probably don't. But Edrington, just like a lot of these other larger conglomerates, owns a number of distilleries around the world. And I'm gonna read off a few of them because it's pretty wild to know how vast their reach is. But the ones that we're doing tonight all are in the, Scotland. 2 of them in the Speyside, and the first one up in the upper Highlands in Orkney. But some of the other brands, just so that you know, Edrington, you have the famous grouse. Obviously, they're a very large brand. You have Wyoming whiskey. I'm just trying to throw out some of the ones that you might have heard of. There's Noble Oak, which is that whiskey that's finished with sherry oak staves. They do a London dry gin. They're part of the Brugal 1888, which is a rum out of, we just were talking about it the other day, Brugal, Dominican, I believe. It's also the same country that Old Line gets their rum from, so we're assuming it's Brugal. But we're gonna focus on Scotland tonight. We're kind of making a left turn to begin with. Normally I wouldn't start a tasting with a super high alcohol, punchy, slightly peaty whiskey, but we had to get it out of the way. It's part of the Edrington portfolio. We're going to start with Highland Park tonight. Highland Park is in Orkney, pretty much as far north as you can go. In terms of whiskey, you have Highland Park and Scapa that are on the island of Orkney. And Highland Park is probably the most known of the 2. It's famous around the world. It's a very, very popular brand. And they've done a really good job with kind of marketing themselves. But they go way back. They go back to the 1700s. They are considered a Viking territory, and their whiskey is almost as old. It goes all the way back to 1798. So we are drinking tonight one of their newer releases. This is a cask strength Highland Park. This is their second release. We did have the first release in the shop, but this is the second release. We have this one as well in the shop. This is 63.9. So I thought, you know what, let's blow our palates out and then drink some water and taste some chocolate and maybe eat some cheese and do whatever you can to clear your palate after this one. But you know what, we need to sometimes shock the system to get us into whiskey mode, and I can't think of a better way to shock the system. So I'm going to let Holly online talk a little bit more about Highland Park. I'll join in here as well, but we were just there. Actually, Matt Coldrick, who's in the room tonight, we were all there just a few 3 years ago now. Geez, time flies. Almost 3 years ago. So awesome place. Yeah, so there you go. Enjoy. This one doesn't have an age statement. It's just super high, powerful proof.
It's going to be every Highland Park cask strength. It's like 60 plus. The first one. Yeah, it's actually really good. It is. You can get it. It's a lot.
And please, use the online scorecard if you're doing this from home. And please feel free to chime in with any tasting notes in the chat room or just vocalize, either way.
This sort of ABV for a distillery release is really cool. I know we were excited to see Highland Park first release a cask strength distillery offering. And I'm not sure, I was going to ask my friend who works for them what they filled the casks at, what proof the whiskey was, because to get it 63.9 for it to end up at that, I have no idea how that happened. They must have been filling some of these casks at a high proof, because Scotland typically will go down in ABV over time. And the water will stay pretty consistent since it's not super dry there. So I have no idea how they got to this, but I think it sips like 57 personally. So I think it sips nice. I get a lot of the sweetness because Highland Park has been known for quite some time, along with actually most of the Edrington brands. When you think of Macallan and Glenrothes as well, now that they're talking about them more, is their whole sherry cask and oak maturation program. So they do pride themselves on their sherry casks, although we know that that has been harder for them to stay true to, both with Macallan and Highland Park. Highland Park was the first one where they started to explore and talk about a mixture of casks, both ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry. And so I'm guessing that's probably what this is, although I get a lot of sherry influence on this too, especially on the nose. So there's still, Edrington's always tried to stick to their guns and do as much sherry cask maturation as possible. It sips all right, right? I don't think it's actually too, I mean, you can taste the alcohol, but it's not too hot on the palate. Yeah, the nose is sherry for sure. I actually wrote like spiked fruit punch. It made me think of Jungle Juice from college when he would just throw like a bunch of fruit punch and spike it with ciders and, you know, all of these different baking spices with lovely alcohol.
I can get that, but when I first smelled it, I thought I could smell leather. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah. And that could be a mix of the sherry cask and Highland Park is one of the last few distilleries to do some of their own floor malting. So 20% of the malted barley that they use is coming from their distillery. The rest they bring in, unpeated malt is brought in from the mainland. And then the 20% that they malt is peated malt, and it's Orkney peat, which is very different than Highland peat, and it's different than Isla peat or coastal peat as well. Now I've been told that they're using some Highland peat too, just because it's easier to access, but you know, they're still definitely using predominantly the Orkney peat. So this is a peated whiskey. Parts per million can vary, but usually it's around, they'll use you know, a portion of the peated malt in their distillation. So leather and peat, I could see that.
What about Orkney peat? So what's different about it?
So the main difference is that, and when you go to Orkney, it's a long boat ride. It's beautiful if you get a nice day, but it's actually a very scary place. It's very windy. You're in the middle of the North Sea, and it's actually a little frightening. I think it's very haunted and terrifying. But you just drink enough whiskey and then you feel okay. But trees don't grow. So you really only have shrubs and brush. So it's more comparable to a Highland peat. You're going to get not as much of a floral peat, but more of this brush shrub, maybe a little bit of salinity because there is a coastal play, but there are no trees on the island. So it's very specific to Highland Park because Scapa does not peat. And that is the other distillery on Orkney, which is owned by Pernod Ricard. And that is completely unpeated, very tiny distillery. So that's really the only, Highland Park's the only place that we can get that dash of Orkney peat. But I still get a floral, like a floral sort of quality.
I added 3 drops of water, and it really brings out the sherry and the floral and smooths it out on the finish too.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna save a little bit, but I drank it all at cask strength, so I'm gonna get my water dropper and try it. Now, you know me, I like my ex-bourbon, and I love Highland Park sherry maturation, but in the UK, they have a 10-year-old Highland Park. It's a blue label, fully matured in bourbon casks, and I should have bought 10 bottles of it. It is delicious. So when I see Highland Park in bourbon, because sometimes you'll see Highland Park in independent bottlers, it's not common, but it's definitely more common than Macallan, which we're lucky that Charles got these SMWS bottles. But Highland Park does very, very well in ex-bourbon as well. See if we get some more sweetness with the water too. Yeah, it's a lighter fruit, Rich. It's a brighter, lighter
Yeah.
fruit. I've been wanting to try this for a while. I actually get, I mean, I still get some of the earth, maybe some of that leather Larry on the finish with the water, but I actually got more peat. Oh, there it is. It's coming out much later on. But I got hit with the peat a little bit sooner without the water.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, we've been talking about it here, the peat level seems quite low in general. I mean, I know it's the heather floral peat, so it's just a much different style of, it's not Isla peat, but some of
I
us,
only find the 12 is where I get the most peat influence from the Highland Park core range. And once it starts to mature, which we don't know the age of this, but I find the older ones, it maybe is not standing up to the oak. I don't get a ton, like I'd put Highland Park with that Oban, you know, that kind of intro to peat. It's there, but it's not the dominant play.
Mhm.
very tasty. Actually, that wasn't a bad one to start with, I have to say.
Yeah, it was fruity, that's for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't knock your palate out.
Yeah,
It doesn't
I was-
destroy it.
I was a little worried at first, but now I'm not so worried about it. I am going to still drink some water though.
That's the Highland Park way though, both on the island and with the whiskey. It's almost it hits you out of nowhere. the alcohol. I don't know. I've had some, Highland Park was one of my original kind of on the back bar sippers. And I've definitely drank a lot of Highland Park 12 back in my beginning days of Scotch whiskey, and it sneaks up on you. I'm not sure how their marketing, I think some people love and some people it's a little bit obnoxious. They're all that Viking, the bottles are beautiful, but their bottles are pretty intense since the rebranding a couple of years ago. They're really trying to not secede from Scotland, but make sure people know that they're much more aggressive and more Viking than the Scots are south of them. That's for sure.
Okay, we're going to move on to dram number 2. So we're going to do a independent bottling that we did one before from Wemyss. So this is Wemyss Malts. Wemyss is a small, kind of a family-run independent bottling group. I'm trying to remember the exact story behind them. Holly might want to jump in on that, but oh, here we go.
They're grain producers.
Yeah, so they're part of the King's Barn Distillery, right? Is that,
Yeah, so their family history though is Fife, and
Fife,
they have a rich and Fife, and which is considered the lowlands, although it's kind of creating its own region, which is a little bit north, and it's east of Edinburgh, that peninsula where St. Andrews is. I know a lot of you golf. So Fife is it actually used to be really another whiskey haven, just like Campbelltown, but it was for grain whiskey. So that's where you first got some of your, top grain whiskeys was coming from the lowlands and Fife, and Wemyss, the family, were involved in that. And then they got out of it, but they've turned into basically an independent bottler, and they've been around for quite some time.
2005.
Yeah, so they've had casks though in their family, and they're kind of like Douglas Lang a bit as well, where their major line are blended malts. So they have the Hive, they have some great blended malts. And then they have these single casks as well, some at 46%, some at net cask strength. And they purchased Kingsbarns Distillery, which is out near St. Andrews. They released their first whiskey within Scotland. I think it was last year, because I tried to get a bottle. And Kingsbarns was actually started by a caddy that used to caddy for folks at St. Andrews, and decided to build a distillery, and then sold it to the Wemyss family. And yeah, they're based in Edinburgh. So I actually got to interview them a few years back, and got to know some of the folks there. And small operation, but if you remember, if any of you were on I forget the tasting, but we had a Clynelish single.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so just so you all know, this is, so some of you remember we did a Wemyss bottling of Clynelish. It was called the Coastal Orchard. So they came out with these kind of almost like seasonal bottles. This one is called the Italian Bakery Delight. And so this is a Glenrothes. So we're now jumping to the Speyside region. And this is a 19-year-old Glenrothes. There were only 347 bottles of this. It is 46% ABV, so we're dropping down quite considerably in ABV for this one, but it is a 19-year-old. We love the Clynelish that we had from Wemyss. It was fantastic. So this is what we're drinking tonight. It was distilled in 1997 and bottled in 2016. So 6 years ago, this was bottled. It's amazing that these are still around. So let's see what Glenrothes is all about. And I have some info on Glenrothes too. Actually, I'll just go ahead and talk about that right now. So Glenrothes, Speyside Distillery, they're located in the town of Rothes, in the heart of Speyside. They sit beside the burn of Rothes, so that's where the town name came from, hidden in a glen on the edge of town. But they've been around for a long time. They've started in 1878 by a gentleman, well, actually a group that also worked at Macallan. And then they ran the first stills in December of 1879. So they've been around a pretty decent amount of time. In 1992, they had a really big fire in warehouse number 1. They lost 200,000 imperial gallons.
Wow.
During that fire. And then they had a fire earlier than that in 1962, which allowed them to actually expand and do a rebuild. And then they have 5 wash stills, 5 spirit stills. They do tend to do quite a bit of sherry cask maturation, which seems to be quite common in the Edrington portfolio, as we'll see also with Macallan. These are going to be really fun, though. These are 3 separate single cask Glenrothes, so we're not doing their traditional, which would be a 10, 12, 18, and a 25-year-old, which are kind of their traditional ones. Very big in Europe. I've traveled, you know, in a lot of countries in Spain and in Italy. You see Glenrothes all over the place. They're really, really popular all over Europe. Much more popular in Europe than they are here in the United States. So this should be fun to try 3 in a row, 19, 21, and 23-year-old. So let's go for the 19, or the, actually I did it on the placemat wrong. This is a 19-year-old, not a 21-year-old. I just saw that.
That changes my score.
Sorry about that.
Not the current one, the one we're doing next.
Charles, this is only 26%.
Yeah.
It seems really.
So this one I actually got to try before tonight. My friend in Massachusetts bought it and I was obsessed with the nose. I remember I ran back to Charles and I was like, you have to smell this. It just smells like every kind of sugar cookie I've ever had in my life. And to me, that is heaven, is some sort of cookie, like Christmas cookie, it's sugar cookie, like almond cookies, that sort of, you know, lighter style of sugar cookie with that orange rind sort of weaved in there. And actually a lot of the Glenrothes that I have, even their core range, I think of this cookie crumble, almost like chocolate chipless cookies, you know, that kind of cookie crumbleness to it. It kind of crumbles on the palate even a little bit. And this one's a little bit more delicate on the palate too, because it's pretty sure it's a hogshead. So we got the 300 bottles because they proofed it down to 46%. So if they had left it at cask strength, there probably would have been just around 200. Any tasting notes for this? This is a little bit different. Hopefully it's not getting lost after Highland Park.
Yeah, so on the bottle itself, it says it's a hogshead, sweet bread loaf with sultanas, icing, sugar, and a marzipan layer.
Yeah, I love that they called it Italian bakery delight, because that sort of dough sort of smell and taste is in there so strong. As soon as I smelled this, the first thing that popped into my mind was, as a kid, I used to eat these like cheap generic vanilla cookies that were like they were like Oreos, but it was like a white cookie and a white cookie with cream in the middle. So almost like a sugar cookie Oreo with like sort of a vanilla cream in the middle. And just immediately that's what jumped into my head. And I don't think I've thought about those in like 10 years or more, you know. It's kind of cool.
Thanks to Scotch. Scotch is the memory driver. That's for sure. Yeah, I do think maybe the Highland Park not muted, but at least for my palate, because I remember it being a little bit more expressive before on the palate, but that's all right. We'll be able to wind back up to cask strength. But Glenrothes, I remember because they were really just released as, and you may have seen their core range bottles. They're the grenade bottles. Yep. They're like these circular bottles. They have age statements, and they have their distiller's cut, which is higher in alcohol, which is really good. It's in a red, with a red label. And I remember the Macallan brand ambassador that I used to know in Washington, DC. I swung by one of his events in 2017, and all of a sudden he was pitching Glenrothes. And I was like, what the heck? Like, no one ever talked about Glenrothes. And it's because Macallan or Edrington actually did own Glenrothes, because Glenrothes is a major component of Cuddy Sark, so the blended Scotch. And a lot of times distilleries move with their blends according to history, because they become an integral part of it. And so they sold it to Berry Brothers and Rudd, the London wine merchants and IB. So Glenrothes was owned by them. Macallan bought Cutty Sark and let them keep Glenrothes. And then they probably realized what a mistake that was, because Cutty Sark wasn't going to keep growing, but a new single malt brand would. And then in 2017, Edrington bought back Glenrothes. So it's been in Edrington's pocket here and there, always as kind of its blending powerhouse. And now we're finally seeing it as a single malt. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see their core range start to pick up and them have some more momentum behind it. But for now, it's mostly independent bottlers.
What do we see in the US mostly?
From Glenrothes? They're those like grenade bottles. They have a
Yeah.
12 distillers cut, or it's distiller maker's cut. Maker's cut, maybe it's called. They're cask strength, which is with a red label. And then they have some other age statements, but it still takes a back seat to Macallan and Highland Park, because I don't even think they have an ambassador team in the States yet, like Highland Park and Macallan do.
I'm sure they do in Europe. They probably have like a massive team because I've seen it everywhere.
The core range,
Yeah, the core range.
yeah. So maybe
And
they
some
chose,
special bottlings too.
yeah, maybe they chose that
Same
market.
style though, the grenade bottles, but more special releases.
They actually do not fit nicely on the shelf. They're terrible to carry in a store. I remember. Not good marketing and branding ideas. Did anyone else get cookies? I'm glad it brought cookies.
Oh, yeah.
Luke.
I was tasting Vienna fingers is what came to me. So it's a lot like what Luke was talking about.
Mhm.
I
Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
I also, both on the nose and on the palate, got like honeydew melon
Mhm.
for me on both, which
Yeah.
is kind of consistent, and I like when it's consistent like that.
Yeah, I wrote subdued citrus, which essentially, would be that honeydew, kind of like the watermelon rind. Still kind of juicy, but on its way out, started on its way to dry out. And it does have, I got a little ginger. There's like a little soft oak cedar quality in there. The hogshead is showing its touch a little bit, but there's not a ton of, it's a very, very calm oak influence.
There is a little bit of oiliness I get with this. It definitely, if you look at your glass, it does stick quite good to the glass for a lighter, fruitier whiskey.
Yeah. This will be a good one as a reference too for the next two cask strength Glenrothes as well, because I think this shows, it's quite old, but it shows raw Glenrothes without a ton of oak influence. Good summer whiskey. All right.
Okay, we're gonna keep moving here. All right, everybody quiet up. I'm gonna talk about this next one. All right, this next one is a little bit of an anomaly. We have a speaker over there. You could turn it down while I'm speaking, that'd be fine. It was more for Holly when she's speaking. So this is a 21 year. This is one of 282 bottles. This is 56.2%. So we've jumped up 10%. but says here, small batch whiskey collection. That's the name of the independent bottler, which if you look online, it's very hard to find anything about these people. Was this the only one we had in the shop, or was there another distillery? This was the only one?
This is the only one, yeah.
So it says on the bottle, small batch whiskey collection is a limited collection of the rarest single cask and single grain malt whiskeys. We tirelessly search from the Highlands to the Lowlands in every corner of Scotland to bring you some of the most revered distilleries' finest spirits. So this is a hogshead, cask number 74, non-chill filtered, 56.2. This is quite an expensive bottle. This is $215.99. So this is no joke. We have not tasted this, but this is Glenrothes again. By the color of it, it's pretty light for 21 years. So
It's like a light pink. Remember, it was like
there
a
is a little bit of hue of color in there.
Franzia.
So this will be interesting. It's very hard to find anything on this bottle.
So they come from, they're imported by Price Imports, which they do distillers art, which we have some of them in the shop. Another independent bottler. They import Silky, Heven, H-V-E-N, it's Swedish?
Swedish, yeah.
malt. And then they have this random release, and I remember I saw it and I asked the distributor, and the distributor was like, I don't know, well, I'll ask. And it's actually a good price for a 21-year-old, cask strength. And so I was like, all right, we'll take a risk on it. And Charles, can you show the bottle? I look for things like this, but there's a misspelling on the bottle. Instead of, where is it? Well, the hogshead. What does it say? Oh, he's on mute. It says hogshead. So they left the S out. And I just love when I find errors on labels. I search for them. So someone probably no one got in trouble because it's such a small brand, but yeah, it's just a hoghead, not a hogshead. So who knows what type of cask that is?
I get a little bit of shoulder and butt on this.
Noghead, yeah.
Oh, sorry, wrong hog.
It is a little pink, like a little hog. Interesting nose. It's like perfume.
It's hard for me to see the family resemblance to the prior one. I mean, it tastes completely different to me.
Yeah, there's nope. I mean, maybe that kind of like citrus cookie again, if you want to push the cookie play, but I mean, not eating citrus cookies a ton. Maybe it's a lemon filled white Oreo, Luke.
Yeah, it's definitely got the citrus going.
It's like a grassy perfume.
I also get a note of almost like when you have one of those big erasers. I don't know why, that's just something wrong with me, but
The pink eraser?
yeah, or the white. I think of the white ones. Like my students use big white ones on exams and stuff like that. But either way, I mean, they probably smell the same, right?
Now I'm so confused.
It is quite different from
Spicy.
the one before, yeah. Well, the alcohol comes through too.
It's still a crumble, but instead of a nice soft cookie crumble, it's You're hearing me work through my thoughts on this one. It's interesting.
The finish to me feels pretty disconnected from the way it smells.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's kind
They're
of,
different. This might be one to add water to.
oh,
There's maybe like one peanut in there. One creamy thing.
the water does smooth it out some.
Yeah, I'm just getting a lot of citrus. A lot of bright, spicy citrus. Yeah, I would not have pegged this as Glenrothes in a blind tasting. I would have thought it would maybe a brighter Speyside malt. Interesting. Well, it's already gone too. So we grabbed 3 bottles of it, and I don't know if they're continuing with this collection or no one really had any information for us. So it looks like it kind of comes and goes in waves. It's a terrible name too, the Small Batch Whiskey Collection. I mean, could try a little bit harder too with the name, like get some brand. Because when you search Small Batch Whiskey Collection, guess what? A lot of things come up. I could call my own collection at home the Small Batch Whiskey Collection. So just call it a day. Yeah, I like the nose. I'm drawn to the nose, but it's so much brighter than this last Wemyss. What's the thought there, Charles?
I think kind of all over the place. I mean, it's kind of hard, you know, I don't hear all of the people's responses on this. So
Oh, I thought you were
what
talking.
do
to
you think the consensus is on this one? Just curious.
It's good.
That way?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that?
So least of the 3 so far.
Yeah.
This is my favorite.
It's okay. There is a favorite for one. It's kind of mixed, so it's all over the place.
We have different.
I'm partial to Wemyss. I always have been.
Yeah. Well, it's again, this is what it's all about, right? You don't get to try a 21-year-old single cask too often, especially from Glenrothes.
I don't know. It's with time, it's getting a little bit sweeter on the nose. It's more of like a
Actually, the
custard.
palate too. The palate is,
Yeah.
is improving, which is what you want from a whiskey. You don't want it to get worse.
I might pour the rest and let this sit for the next few whiskeys and see what happens.
So I have a question. When you let a whiskey sit in the glass, or you're making that decision to let it sit, is it about something happening to the whiskey, or is it about something happening to your palate? Like if the flavors changed or the scent has changed over time, is it from repeatedly sipping it and sniffing it, or is it from like air? I would imagine that would be the thing, evaporation or something happening in the glass.
Yeah, I don't know the real scientific. I mean, I guess you could ask someone with wine because they're always decanting and letting that breathe. But I don't think we're talking about the same breathing process with the amount of alcohol we're talking about. It's, yeah, just more of water's really what's going to open up a whiskey and help that alcohol kind of wind down and show its true flavors when you're at that ABV. But I do find in bourbon too, because I don't find a huge change in general when I add water to American whiskey. It just tastes like a watered down version of what I already tasted. But time out in the open will, some of that, basically just access to air and oxygen, I find will open it up. So we've had, the Penelope Light whiskey, our latest Cardinal, when I've let those sit for 5 to 10 minutes and go back, that it's a different whiskey. So I don't know there's probably some science. I think it's just truly access to oxygen and letting it breathe. But it's not our palates. My palate's going to be messed up in another few. So it's more of just the time with air.
Gotcha. I'll tell you what, it sure tastes bad the next morning if you leave it out.
Yes.
Not always. Not always.
Oh, not always. Okay.
Sometimes at the big tastings, I go around the next day and just finish off all the glasses and
all the fruit flies, and just all the protein.
Oh, right. Next time I'll have to leave some for you.
I pour it all into one. It's like, I can't pour it down the toilet. I mean,
No, of course.
no, I'm just kidding. I'm being recorded. Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move on to number 4. Shalom, you want to lower that volume? Okay, so we're going now to another realm. We're going to Scotch Malt Whiskey Society bottlings, these next 4. We're actually gonna, it's been a beautiful week here in Saratoga so far. We're touching 80 degrees today, I believe. How about we go back to Christmas? I mean, why not, right? So we had, as we know, there were some bottles that were released last year from the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society that were from their tasting panel experience. And this was one of those. This is a 23-year-old Glenrothes. This one had, I'm going to read the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society description of it. This was a USA allocation only. So there were 157 bottles released in the world, all to the US. This is 54% ABV, distilled in 1997. But I'm going to read the description right now because it tells you a little bit about the finishing. So here we go. This one's called A Christmas Changeling from distillery number 30, which is Glenrothes. This is cask number 116. So they've done quite a few of them. So it's fiercely polished mahogany, greets the eyes with a deep amber gaze, with thanks given to the cask this rested in. After 21 years in an ex-bourbon cask, it soaked up its final splash of color from its 2.5 years in a first fill Spanish oak Pedro Ximenez hogshead. Lingers in the glass with soft yet powerful notes of dates and mixed dried fruits, salted caramel, maraschino cherries, and pure maple syrup. Almonds and candied walnuts dance into Christmas cake, followed by savory notes of balsamic vinegar reduction, dry Oloroso and cinnamon nutmeg spice. Water introduces lime pickle, not sure if I want lime pickle, and mango chutney. The palate with its viscous texture gives a light acidity and sweetness, turning into a drying, long, pleasantly spicy finish. Water excites with a sweet and sour, meaty grilled steak with garam masala curry spice, topped with hardwood sawdust. Long and warm finish of Christmas pudding, balsamic and candies, nuts, the holiday spirit of spirits. Well, there you go. It's quite the long description, but quite a fun description, taking us back into the middle of December or late December for our Christmas cake. So by the way, speaking of Christmas cake, what the hell is Christmas cake? I was on a Scotch Malt Whiskey Society preview on Monday night for their Speyside exclusive releases for the fish, and it was part of the discussion that night. It's like, why the hell do all these people use Christmas cake as a tasting note? And, you know, I think it's one of those things that you have to grow up eating Christmas cake to know really what a Christmas cake tastes like, because everything you taste goes back to some early childhood memory for the most part when it comes to savory notes or sweet notes. So unless you grew up in Scotland or Ireland and some of these countries with Christmas cake, you shouldn't be calling anything Christmas cake. I mean, period. So we can all, I guess, pretend we know, I guess. Christmas tastes like Christmas cake. So.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there are specific Christmas cakes to
Hate to
Scotland.
say it, but it reminds me of a Twinkies.
There you go.
My Christmas cake.
Oh, so this one is 54%. This was $260 plus tax and shipping. So this is like over a $300 bottle of whiskey here.
My rating just went lower.
Thank the Spanish oak finish for that. The cask probably cost more than they paid for the distillate.
Charles, what was the ABV again?
They don't know what it's talking about.
54.
54, thanks.
He said it tastes hotter than the first one.
I don't know what Christmas cake is, but this is like a delicious spice cake. I mean, it's sweetness and spice and really nice mouthfeel, coats your mouth.
Yeah, this one sticks pretty well to the glass.
Definitely enjoyed this one much better than the last one.
Oh, amen.
I agree.
The sherry is like really well balanced. In this. Like it's not
The finish for me is a little
just enough sherry.
Yeah.
over sherried. I can hear Dan speak, but I don't know. It's a little, I don't taste Glenrothes on the finish. It has left the building with this Pedro Ximenez cask. On the nose, I still get it.
That's kind of the, you know, the big question with sherry is it being used to hide something? You know, sometimes it really can. And as Holly and I really appreciate with our bourbon cask love, you know, bourbon doesn't hide as much as sherry. And sometimes you kind of wonder if sherry is being used to, you know, not only attract the people who like sweet things, but also maybe to hide some of the immaturity of the distillate.
Well, at this age, I'm so surprised. 2.5 years is a long time. I mean, I don't know if first fill, if they're wiser than I am, but if that was necessary, like I could see 3 to 6 months for like a dash of that, but I mean, it was already a 21-year-old, and to put it for 2, and that's very uncommon to see that long of a finish on that old of a whiskey. Usually you see that with whiskeys in that, you know, kind of 8 to 15-year-old range, when you're really trying to kind of amp up, you know, what it hasn't achieved with time yet. But at 21 years, I'm surprised, but it's fun to taste that. You don't see that often.
What about if it was a, the difference between an Oloroso or a PX? I mean,
Well, and it's Spanish oak, so it's Corcus Robert. It's not even Corcus Elba, which will keep the vanilla undertone with the sherry. You know, this is baking spice, heavy, sweet sherry time.
yeah.
So, and Glenrothes.
I've had a couple of Glenrothes, older Glenrothes with Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, and they usually are extremely sherry. Whether it's first fill sherry from the beginning, or if the finish is really long in sherry, but maybe that's what they like. You know,
Yeah.
the tasting panel of the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society that's what they expect from a Glenrothes. you know.
Yeah. And they might feel that it needs that. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone does have their preference of,
Sure.
know.
And I have to say, they've been extremely popular. When these come up for sale, they go instantly, like extremely fast. This one went really fast. Even being this expensive, it went really fast.
Honestly, if you're not buying 6 bottles.
I mean, I like Glenrothes, but it's not, there's so many great space sides. You know, I don't know. It's an interesting bird.
So Charles, just, or Holly, whoever has it, just out of curiosity, what flavor classification does SMWS give this? Is it the dried fruit one?
Charles, do you have the bottle again? Oh, he's looking it up, maybe.
So this isn't even in a flavor description. It's under the old and dignified
Really?
flavor.
Wow.
So I guess once you get to 23 years, you're old and dignified.
Dignified and old.
I'm going to be 52 in a few months, so maybe I'll be really old and dignified.
Yeah, what do you want to be finished in when you turn?
Yeah, embalm me in sherry.
I'll take the hog head. It's very good. I mean, I got a lot of, you know, chocolate, espresso. I got that cherry, those like the chocolate Werthers, that rich, you know, sort of spicy chocolate coffee vibe from it. I think Glenrothes is still figuring itself out. There's no, we tasted 3 very different ones. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue to evolve as they grow as a brand.
How long, I don't know if you said this, how long has the brand been around?
The distillery's been producing single malt since the late 1800s. So from that, that was another big wave of new distilleries opening up, but it really didn't get brought. I think it was released here and there as a single malt, but its main purpose was for blends, and it was for Cutty Sark up until 2016, 2017. So that's when Edrington bought it back and started releasing it. But it probably, most people started dabbling in single malts, whether in the 80s or 90s, early 2000s, but I think everyone was still a little bit nervous. Blends still were more comfortable and made more quick money. But yeah, so we're definitely going to see more of it, especially as Macallan continues to become more popular. Highland Park has gone through its stock issues as well. We lost their 15-year-old and Dark Origins. You know, we start to see these newer distilleries pop up when the bigger brand names start to have stock issues, which doesn't mean they're inferior. They just were never given, you know, the marketing teams pick the ones that they think will succeed, and that's what they focus on.
Okay, all right, everybody. Voices down. All right.
DJ.
I don't want to hear myself over there. Okay, so we're gonna end with 3 whiskeys. And I want you to shoot them all as fast as possible. I'm just kidding. I just want to see what kind of reaction we got. or people are listening. Okay, all right. So occasionally, the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society does what they call a distillery dive, which means they're going to pick certain whiskeys from one distillery that have all been distilled on the same date and then matured in different types of casks. So, as we know, Macallan is considered one of the biggest brands and one of the most sought after brands. And I like to call them the Rolls Royce of Scotch whiskey because they're great, but they're super expensive and most people know about it. And most people will ask for it at a bar because it's one of those more common, high-priced scotches. And, you know, especially here in Saratoga in the middle of the race course season, you're having these people come into the bar and spend, you know, $150 to $200 on a pour of Macallan, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, but it is what it is. It's one of those things. It's a status whiskey, but they are good for what they are as well. And I'm not dissing Macallan. I've been there twice. I went to the old distillery before it closed down, and then I visited the new distillery as well, which is quite the showroom, and it's the Disneyland of whiskey in a way in the Space Side, but beautiful in its own right. And they make great whiskey. There's no doubting that the whiskey that they put out is great. It is fantastic. It's just too expensive in my book. However, Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, actually before they released this bundle, they did a single cask of Macallan that I purchased before this, and I opened for myself because I'm greedy sometimes. But it's not too often that that happens, but it was fantastic. It was really, 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 really good. And I was like, okay, when this bundle came around, I was like, I need to have this bundle because these single casks, I don't know if you've seen, but single casks of Macallan, like the regular release edition of Macallan, go for like $2,500 or more. It's ridiculous. These are like crazy, crazy prices. We're talking Pappy craziness. And some of the older Macallans go for $20,000 to $50,000 for a cask, which is just also really crazy. So this bundle came along. I'm going to read what the email was, and this was the email that I responded to. It was a lottery release, so this is special lottery release. So you had to win. Fortunately, we got a winner on this one, but here's the email. Fancy a dive into an ocean of flavor? That's exactly what you're in for. Welcome to distillery number 24, which is Macallan, a space-side jewel that has captured the hearts and minds of so many society members. Today, we'll examine the impact of cask maturation by exploring the evolution of one whiskey aged in 3 very different casks. In October of 2018, Scotch Malt Whiskey Society Spirit Manager Ewan Campbell identified a handful of casks from distillery number 24 that had been aged in Oloroso sherry butts for 10 years. He decided this collection of whiskey had a different destiny than the usual single cask release. These Oloroso sherry butts would be vatted, married together, and recast for another 2 years of aging in different first fill wood. This experimental approach to cask management unearthed an utterly delicious and unique world of flavor, highlighting the impact and influence these additional maturations have on whiskey from the same vatting. The trio of casks released today shows Ex-Bourbon, Oloroso sherry, and Pedro Ximenez sherry casks used for an additional maturation, offering an unforgettable tasting experience. So we're starting with, so we're going a little out of order for what they said in the email, but cask number 24-152, which is called Albino Rhino, shows us why Distillery 24 is such a stalwart make of whiskey. From an ex-bourbon cask, we discover heady aromas and rich notes of orchard fruits, cinnamon buns, pecan pie, butterscotch, and toffee apples. Try this cask first before the sherried expressions and delight in a purely make-driven mouthfeel that will forever impress your senses. So this was only released as a bundle. There were only 90 bottles of each whiskey that made their way to the US. And it was by lottery. The whole bundle itself was $475 plus tax and shipping, which is a steal for Macallan single casks. You know, so each was $175. Oh no, that's if they were ordered separately, 175, which is ridiculous for Macallan. So this first one, Albino Rhino, 63.4%,
Oh,
12 years. These are all 12 years. They were all distilled on the same date, which is October 13th of 2008. Let me make sure they're all the same. Yeah, 13. Yeah, so all of them October 13 of 2008, which is pretty damn cool. We don't have that too often. But yeah, Albino Rhino, ex-bourbon. So I'm going to read the notes on this one. We were delighted to find a deep and heady aroma brimming with Hessian, exotic hardwood resin, cider apples, dunnage must, and carbolic acidity. Notes of camphor, lamp oil, butterscotch, and toffee apple were all noted. Reduction, which is adding water, brought cinnamon swirls, pecan pie, toasted bagel with Biscoff spread, chopped macadamia nuts, and milk chocolate covered Brazil nuts. Wow. The neat palate displayed the initial warmth of aged Calvados, then caramelizing brown sugar, baked apples, lime curd, and yellow meadow flowers. Water brought floral intensity of dandelions, carnations, and potpourri. Then touches of herbal cough medicines, tarragon, dried apricots, and mineral oils. At 10 years of age, we combined selected Oloroso butts from this distillery. We then returned the single malt into a variety of different casks to develop further. This is one of those casks. So there you go. I have not tasted any of these three. I'm super excited to try them. Definitely leave a little bit in your glass to do a little bit of a side-by-side so you can taste the differences with all these different finishes. These are all different finishes. So hope you enjoy.
wow.
Are all of the distillery dives that?
A thread that I usually get in Macallan is old apples. So not quite dehydrated, crispy, dried fruit apples, but like really old red apples. Like really like mushed, bruised, like they've been kicked around, old apples. And we've all eaten that apple because that's what happens, because apples get left in your backpack for days and it gets mushed and kicked and beat up, and then you eat it with its bruises anyways because it's fine. But I definitely get that in the ex-bourbon out of the gate.
As long as they're not mealy, Holly.
Yes, which you don't know until you bite into it, which is
Yes,
always
and
the
it's
risk.
Yes, and the worst experience ever.
But see, then I just keep eating it anyways because I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks and I need to just eat it.
Then it's a matter of principle then.
Yes, I will get my vitamins. Yeah, interesting little process they had here. You used to, I guess because they use their numbers, it's different, but back in 2017, 18, Gordon and MacPhail released an 8, a 10, and a 30. I'm getting those ages. Maybe it was a 15, but it was a young, a teenage, and an older Macallan, and they were called Spey malts. So they weren't allowed to use the Macallan name. And this first one is reminding me of those. Those were hogsheads and ex-bourbon matured Macallans. So it's you really only see some of the big time independent bottlers like Gordon and MacPhail, SMWS, Signatory. I'm sure Blackadder has worked with them before too, but a newer brand, a new IB would really never get access to such casks. It's some of these old staples of independent bottlers. So if you see something called Spey malt, buy that too, because that's Macallan as well. And I remember we had a customer at Gordon's that he came in, he did a lot of business in Hong Kong, and he bought 6 bottles of it was like a 28, 29, maybe 30-year-old Spey malt. And I know what he was doing. He was flipping them in overseas for double the money. So I had to turn my eye to that, but it hurt my soul. I knew he was not drinking them. I knew he was flipping them for double the price. And that was back in 2017.
I absolutely see the apple. I have a Sagamore Spirit rye finished in Calvados that this strongly reminds me of, but with the sort of malt flavor to it instead of the rye. The finish is almost the same to me. But yeah, throughout, even just the smell of it, if I think I was blindfolded, I think I would have thought it was that bottle.
Macallan would probably die if they heard you compared to Sagamore, but I totally agree with the Calvados, and Macallan would die if we compared them to anyone. So it doesn't matter. We can just let them die. But when you go to their old, same with Charles, I went to both distilleries. The new distillery is different. This would still be old distillery. But it's going to be interesting to see how things turn out. They obviously tried to replicate it and expand it, but their mash tun is very different. Their fermenters are different. And Macallan's known for a pretty quick distillation. So they have shorter pot stills. So although it's Speyside and we're getting that fruit, they do tend to be a little bit heavier. Just because it's less copper contact. The distillation is a little bit quicker. And it's getting kind of, think about it, up and out on that line arm and out of the still. It's always great to think back to the tallest stills in Scotland, which are Glenmorangie. And there's just more bouncing, more copper contact as that evaporation and that that spirit is coming in contact with the copper, where you can see it for sure at the new distillery. All of their wash and spirit stills are quite squat. So it's just a little bit of a quicker distillation, but they are using shell and tube condensers. So it's not a worm tub distillery, but it is, I find it to be just a tad heavier than your more modern Speyside malt, which is maybe why it sits quite nice in sherry and why they've always leaned that way. So we'll go to the Oloroso. This is really their bread and butter, is Macallan and Oloroso sherry casks. Anyone have a regular Macallan 12 bottle? Now's the time to pull it out and compare it side by side.
Okay, like I said, don't finish this one. If you can keep a little bit. I'm gonna drink it tomorrow, so. Oh, sorry, no, I want you to compare. So real quickly, as we progress with these next two, one of the ideas I had for this tasting, which didn't materialize, and maybe we'll do it in the future, is I really want people to understand what sherry and what the differences are in sherry. I mean, I personally have not been to any bodegas. I do not know sherry like I should know sherry. You know, so I was thinking it would be fun to actually have a tasting where we tried some different sherries and then tried some whiskeys that are aged in those casks, just to see really, you know, and understand sherry. But this wasn't the case, so for tonight, but we will do that. But I found a website that at least explains some of the differences, because the next two are Oloroso and Pedro Ximenez, and I get a lot of questions. What are the differences between these two? So I'm going to read this before we go into our next two whiskeys. So this is from a guy named Whiskey Smiths. He did a blog post, but here we go. So sherry cask finished whiskeys and even whiskeys aged entirely in sherry casks are popular in the whiskey world. Perhaps you've heard of the terms Oloroso or Pedro Ximenez in the whiskey conversation. What do those names mean? Is there even a difference between them? And can you actually taste the variance in the whiskey? Let's find out. So first of all, what is sherry? For the sake of this blog post, I'm going to give you the simplest definition. Sherry is a fortified wine made in a specific region of Spain. If your curiosity impels you to want to know more, then Google it. However, you know, think of champagne. You know, champagne can only be made in Champagne, part of France. So think of that in terms of sherry. So how many different types of sherry are there? There are actually 8 different types of sherry. Oloroso and PX are just 2 of those. Of the 8, Fino is the driest. PX, Pedro Ximenez, is the sweetest. And Oloroso falls about in the middle. So we're tasting Oloroso and Pedro Ximenez next. So think about that. Oloroso is in the middle. Pedro Ximenez is the sweetest. So why are Ex-Oloroso and PX casks the most popular for aging whiskey? He says, I actually don't know the answer. I just know that they are. If you know, then Google it. All right, so Oloroso typically have a dark, rich dark flavor in which you'll find caramel, walnut, and deep fruit notes. And with PX sherry, Pedro Ximenez, you'll find incredibly sweet, and you'll even get darker flavors of like toffee, fig, raisin, and molasses. Oh, so Holly just wrote notes. Cavalon has an amazing sherry series as well, which is true out of Taiwan. Incredible sherry series. So how do these 2 types of sherry affect a whiskey's flavor? As you might guess, the aromas and flavor listed above respectively are what each sherry has to offer, but there are also other elements to consider when it comes to how much sherry imparts. For example, was the whiskey aged entirely in sherry, or was it just finished for a few months, or as in this case, for longer? Was it first fill sherry or refill cask? So all of these things you have to think about. All right, so this one we're tasting right now. The next one is Oloroso. Hold on one second here. Let me pull up the... Okay, so we're doing 24.149. This one's called Character and Grace. 90 bottles, again. So here are the tasting notes. This one's 63.6. So it just went up 0.2%. So very close. Here's the description. We were busy in the kitchen baking gingerbread as well as malt loaf, and one panelist's favorite from Mum, ooey gooey cinnamon buns with raspberry and blackberry jam. On the palate, like a baked Alaska flambe served with pistachio and raspberry ice cream. Diluted a dark chocolate brownie, so that's with water, with burnt raisins, or a dark, warm sourdough bread dipped into a balsamic fig dipping sauce emerged. The taste was deeply characterful, mature yet graceful, seared foie gras, and a lingonberry jam on brioche toast. So same thing in 2018, they combined these Oloroso butts. So this is Oloroso on Oloroso. So if you're gonna taste Oloroso, this would be your taste. So if you really want to get what Oloroso is all about, this should be it.
Charles, does it say what style of oak? I mean, with the hogshead for the Pedro Ximenez, it could be a mixture, but I'm guessing it's American oak.
It says first fill Spanish oak Oloroso hogshead.
Okay, so this one's Spanish. Does the PX say?
The PX is American oak.
American oak, okay. Because I think that's a common misconception as well when people think, oh, sherry Spain, all sherry casks are Spanish or European oak, which is actually has a very different type of and style of grain to the oak tree itself. And most sherry is matured in American oak, actually, which is more, think of bourbon, which is your vanillin, your vanilla, I mean, it's not charred or, but it's got that vanilla caramel toffee undertone compared to Spanish oak, which is spicier.
So would you consider this a sherry bomb?
I want to split it. I'll drink
My food is on the bottom.
Yeah. I mean, it's sherry from nose, middle to finish.
Yeah.
It's not overdone though. There's nuance.
Yeah.
I'm actually enjoying
I
it.
agree.
So,
I think this is actually a very good example of Oloroso.
usually my tasting notes fall short with a heavily sherried whiskey because it's just more sherry notes, more ways of saying sherry. But this one I actually there was a lot going on. Maybe because it's a little bit, well, it's not young, it's 12, but.
Yeah.
Also, this Glenrothes, the 21-year-old that I let sit, it smells more like the Wemyss now, just FYI. It's starting to get a sweeter vanilla. So if anyone else left it out, I'm gonna let it sit.
I did leave a little bit when you said that, and it is much sweeter, at least
Yeah.
than my memory would.
I mean, my initial tasting note was grassy perfume with, bright, sharp lemon and 1 peanut. That's what I wrote. So now I would definitely have more like on that, not quite cream, but we're headed to that vanilla, cannoli side of things.
Yeah, I get a bit of almost like a dreamsicle smell.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
Hey, Holly, we have a discussion going on here, which is pretty interesting. Shalom asked a question, and it really kind of makes you think, with Springbank, that they are masters of maturation, right? Their distillate might not be great for everyone, but they know what they're doing when it comes to maturation. And Macallan, this is first in Oloroso. We know that for a fact. He personally didn't like the bourbon finish. I thought the bourbon finish was great, but is Macallan like trying to distill their spirit towards a sherry like cask maturation? I mean, so some distillates want to show their distillate, right? They want it to flourish. I find it in this as well, but for whatever the reason, the bourbon one didn't work for Shalom and a couple other people too. So, you know, is it part of their plan to actually distill to make a certain flavor profile based on their maturation techniques, or is that just, you know, a random kind of thing? Or
Yeah.
as we know with Springbank, they do everything, right? And they're really good at maturation and barrel types.
Well, I was telling the virtual group, as we started with the Macallan, it'll be interesting to see too, of course, with any new distillery, you know, what in 10 years everything tastes like. But you've seen it, Charles. They're known for a pretty quick distillation and they're squat stills. So Macallan's not known for a ton of copper contact. You know, it's got that heavy old fruit, and not a worm tub sulfur fruit, just like it's just a little bit heavier. Which I think, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I would think that should lean towards a sherry maturation, because it's, you know, a little bit denser off the still. Even their new make is like a little bit of this damp, musty apple.
Yeah.
So I would think that does well in a Oloroso sherry butt, and they probably realized that pretty quickly.
Well, I'm just curious, what were your thoughts on the bourbon finish?
Well, it's not as bright. I mean, the Macallan distillate, I think, actually in a positive, not a negative way, but dragged it down. I mean, the bourbon for me wasn't super bright. I mean, I still got a lot of musty, old, warm apples, like a toffee, spice, malty. And as it sat, it kind of like is sweaty, you know, like sweaty skin, like warm, sweaty skin. It's got this like,
Must?
yeah, we'll call it human must.
You've been smelling my shoes too much as I sit next to you.
Yeah, I've been hanging out with boys too often. It's all musty and smelly. Yeah, I actually find Oloroso brighter. I find it a little bit brighter with brighter red fruits. I mean, I like Ex-Bourbon, but it's not bright. I mean, there's not a ton of bright citrus and zest.
I mean, it would have been great if it was bourbon cask to begin with, and then
Exclusively, I know.
yeah.
I know. Because that's a weird left-hand turn.
Yeah, it is how do you even go to bourbon after Oloroso? I don't understand that, but
Yeah.
you're adding some very different notes.
Poor bourbon, it didn't have a fighting chance. It didn't even have a shot.
It was still, I actually liked it a lot.
Yeah, it's
But it
like
was
a heavy bourbon.
unusual. You know, it's not your typical Macallan, that's for sure.
What's like a heavy, musty bourbon? It's like a Colorado bourbon cask.
Yeah.
Like you took a Colorado whiskey.
Definitely keep a little bourbon in your glass, because it's kind of fun to go through them all. All right, so we're gonna go to the last one. All right, so we're gonna go to the last one tonight. It's called Boone's Farm. It's 12 years old. Oh, sorry. No, this is actually another frickin' Macallan. Damn it! All right, so this one is called, and we're going straight to Morocco on this one. It's called a Meandering Amaze of Souks, and that's S-O-U-K-S. This again, 12 years old. It was distilled at the same time as these other two. This one's 63.1. Again, 90 bottles in the US, but this is finished in a first fill American oak, Pedro Ximenez hogshead. All right, so here are the notes. We prepared a pitcher of pomegranate storm, in quotes, using pomegranate molasses, rum, orange liqueur, lemon juice, ginger beer, soda water, and a dash of orange bitters. On the palate, cinnamon custard, creme caramel, coconut macaroons, and sea buckthorn donuts. And sea buckthorn donuts, whatever the hell buckthorn donuts are. A drop of water, and we walk through a maze of souks with a souk. Come on, man. With exotic aromas of argan oil, cumin, saffron, turmeric, as I tell Rebecca. Turmeric. I know. I like to give her a hard time. And Ras El Hanout, which must be a, is that a hummus? Oh, coriander, sorry. Teasing our senses. We then ate fresh Bari dates, so sweet and creamy, reminding us of fresh sugarcane, coconut, and butterscotch. Wow. If this isn't one to finish on with dessert, I don't know what is. 63.1, I believe, was what I said. Yep.
I mean, it's living up to its PX reputation on the nose. It's like buttered syrup pancakes.
Wow. This reminds me of Angel Zemby on steroids.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Lots of sweetness.
And these are PX?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pedro Ximenez.
And did they do it like they did Oloroso, or PX on PX?
No, Oloroso on PX.
There's
All of these are Oloroso first, and then bourbon, Oloroso, and PX.
So even that first one had Oloroso, but I didn't get a whole lot of, I mean, it had a sweetness to it, but I didn't
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very bizarre way to do it, but they were showing how it works, right?
Yeah,
How the finishing works.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
This is pretty delicious.
It is.
It is.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to 20 shots. Yeah. It's above a 23.
No, Dogwood's the ones with the big.
I'm not the biggest sherry fan, like in general. Like, I don't mind. I love Glen Parkless. I love Apple Hour. I love, you know, some sherried whiskeys, but it's not my first thing. And it's always fun to really try some sherry bombs. This is the dessert sherry bomb.
We should take a vote of the favorite of the three.
I gotta turn the volume on.
Okay. I'll take count here. Okay. How many people for the bourbon Macallan? 0. Okay. Maybe the pup. Maybe the pup will vote. We've got 1. Okay. I liked it too. Oloroso. Wait, 1, 2. 2 Olorosos. Todd, was your hand up? No? 1. Okay, so 1 Ex-Bourbon, 2, and then the PX was everyone else. Diane and Dave, did you vote? You vote for all of them. All right.
We were not paying attention. Sorry. What are we voting for?
We're voting on the Macallans.
They're watching some Netflix show. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I love Ozarks. Okay. But so which
Your
one we like?
favorite, bourbon, Oloroso, or PX?
The Oloroso.
Okay.
Oh, I was gonna say PX, so, okay.
Okay. All right, we've got our votes.
all right. So the in-person group definitely was very heavy on the PX.
Us too.
And then Oloroso was second and bourbon was third. So, but very, very heavy on PX. There was very few hands. There were a couple of hands on Oloroso and
What
no
was yours,
hands.
Charles?
What?
What was yours? Mine's Oloroso,
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. Mine's Oloroso as well.
which I'm
Oloroso,
shocked.
PX, and bourbon.
Oloroso bourbon PX.
Yeah, I'm the other way. I like the PX, but Oloroso was first. It just made more sense. It kind of fit better. I mean, the PX is great, but it's hiding some Oloroso. But it's very good. It's very good.
It was fun.
Don't hide the Oloroso. Keep it in the open.
Well, this has been a wonderful tasting. Whew.
So now you can tell people you've tasted Macallan single cask. So you can tell them to go, F you, you know. This club is not about being better than anybody, but it's pretty cool to taste 3 Macallan single casks in one tasting.
Oh,
So,
definitely. This was a great tasting.
Yeah, so, you know, just remember this one. It's one of those, we're not gonna have a lot of Macallan 3 single cask tastings, so.
I was gonna say, next Macallan tasting, Charles, is single casks, so go find them. And
Yeah.
then we'll do the core range. And then we'll taste, you know, what the distillery decisions are at 40% and what the IB decisions are.
What, for Macallan, I have a fine oak. What's the single cast and fine oak difference? Is there a
The
difference?
fine oak is ex-bourbon. Yeah, that's their, but the fine oak, I thought they discontinued. Have you had that for a while?
A friend of mine got it for me in 2001. It's a 30-year-old.
Okay, yeah, because they got rid of, I was pretty sure, traditional, or they discontinued one of them, and I think it was fine oak.
I
So,
can show you the case that it's in. I haven't opened it
Yeah.
yet. So
oh, that's cool. Yeah, they came out with because people can't keep up with the age statements, and I think we might have one of them here, but in Europe they took away most of the age statements for Macallan first, and they came out with a bunch of non-age statements and gave them names, and I forget them all, but one of them was Amber. They had all of these different names, and unfortunately in the industry we called them the stripper series because they were like all all random girl names. And so we just called them this. It was a really bad joke, but hey, when you're Macallan and you're on top, you have to make fun of them. So it was all of these funny names for their non-age statements. And now we're starting to get some of them here, and they're starting to take away things. But they've been taking away things for about 5 or 6 years now. And fine oak, Todd, was one of those.
well, yeah, I've been waiting to try it. So for a
Mhm.
special occasion. So didn't
Yeah.
know what the difference was.
Great bottle.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be interesting to try. And I'm not saying, you know, rule them all out, never taste them, never buy them, never speak about them, but to try chill filtered, color added, 40% Macallan next to, or any brand next to non-chill filtered, no color added, maybe even not natural cask strength, but just at 46%. And just really see what people think, and maybe even do that blind, because we're told all of these things about chill filtration, and I think that'd be it. And Macallan's notorious for that, since they're known to color and chill filter their core range.
Holly, that sounds like a great tasting experiment.
I know. Charles can ship out
Charles?
blindfolds with all of your kits.
Come on. You can do it.
No, if I come up with ideas like that, it'll be me that puts it together. So I have to be careful. Create
We
more
know,
work for
we know
myself.
who the brains are in this organization.
When it comes to designer kits, it's me that's putting those together.
Yay.
Yeah, so I went back to, I don't think most of you have it, but this Glenrothes is just evolving in the glass. It's getting better.
You talking the Wemyss?
No, actually the
Oh, the
small batch
21.
whiskey collection. Yeah. So if you do have any left, just pour it out and let it sit for 20 minutes.
All right, everybody. I know we're getting to an hour and 45 minutes or so. How do you enjoy it overall? Thumbs up? Yeah?
10 out of 10.
Good
This is
job.
excellent.
I'm trying my hardest to provide some great experiences. So I know we have a limited people on online right now. The crowd behind me is pretty loud, so
You know, just some initial feedback on this. I think
Yeah.
this worked very nicely.
worked
I
okay.
mean, well,
All right,
you
well-
muted yourself and went off. God knows what was going on out there.
Yeah.
I would have to agree. It worked really
The
well.
problem is I need to start paying Holly though. That's the problem.
No, I was going to say, I was curious to hear feedback. I thought maybe it'd be after we got off the call, but all of you were stuck with me. So I was wondering if you were.
I didn't consider it stuck, so.
Yeah, no, not at all. I thought it was excellent.
It's very quiet here in the shop, Charles. I'm very relaxed. There's no one here.
It's a little
What are you
scary,
trying
right?
to say?
So much for doing this.
Should I come in late tomorrow?
Like every other day, you mean?
Oh, hey.
No, actually, Charles I'm the one that's running in.
Yeah,
You just have to walk downstairs.
I'm there all the time. Come on now. No, it's all good. So
Always impressed with both of your knowledges. It's just amazing. So, yeah, thank you.
yeah, we're trying. We're learning every day. That's for sure.
I appreciate you keeping people at a distance, somehow managing to keep us connected.
Yeah,
So
we
this is
will.
great.
We will for sure. I mean, we have a lot of in-person stuff coming up, but we will definitely do Zoom stuff as well. And,
Yep.
we'll figure it out. So,
Well,
I'm going to
think
stop
we
the
need
recording though.
Edrington-
We can keep online as long as we want, but I'm going to stop the recording. So hope you all enjoyed it.
I think Edrington would be very happy with how we
Yeah,
represented
exactly.
their brands.
Maybe we should use that, right?